Good morning, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing, we wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. There's some serious evidence of a culture that predates anything that we believe in today. Now, let me be specific. I'm not advocating for Atlantis or space aliens influencing us. Those are all possible. I'm not saying that they're not, but keep my observations strictly in the sense of pointing and saying something happened here. We're talking about the time period between 20 and 80,000 years ago. I base this on two artifacts, which are really interesting, and I suggest you look them up. The Ashango bone and the Lubumbo bone. Yes, the second sounds like a bad strip club, but at the same token, it is an incredibly important artifact. The Ashango bone is something I've been curious about forever. And it's an antler, bit of quartz embedded in the bottom, and it's been carved. And people agree that whatever the intent was carving it, it seems to match a 6-month period of the lunar cycles. Interesting. So again, it carbon dates in around 20,000 years old, but people were already able to take a bone, make a calendar, and were planning 6 months in advance, if not more. The popular theory is women were using it to keep track of their menstrual cycles. But a calendar is an infinitely useful tool. Yes, that might have been its purpose, but 20,000 years ago, people were just starting to pay attention to the maturation of plants, the cycles that they grew. And given 20,000 years ago, we still had an ice age and the human population was not so widespread as it is now. The potential uses for this are astronomical. And again, planning 6 months in advance, that could very well be keeping track of the various places where you have 2 harvests a year. It could also be marking some sort of an anniversary. The ancient peoples in general tended to do things by the moon. Hence our modern word month, moonth, just upgraded for our current state of pronunciation. Being able to track things by the sun is a lot more difficult. The moon is kind of intuitive. Tracking the sun, you have to be able to observe it day by day, mark its current position. It's a whole other ballgame. But the moon, yes, humans the world over recognize the moon and its phases. So it makes sense. Let's move on to the Lubumbo bone. Now we're dating back to 80,000 years ago. People are in the Old Stone Age. Actually, the Ashango bone is also in the Old Stone Age, the Pleistocene. And we haven't really figured out what's going on with it. But it's made of a baboon bone, and it shows, unlike the Ashango bone, it shows that multiple people carved on it. Now, the scientists involved use my least favorite word possible. Well, it could have been for rituals. Humans do have rituals, but humans also have a purpose for everything that they do. And they're not just going to be hacking away at a baboon bone. First of all, it shows humans were eating baboons. Yes, we know they were eating elk and deer and things that have antlers, which is actually pretty impressive considering spears, maybe bows and arrows, etc. But 80,000 years ago, we were not afraid to prey on the species next door, baboons. They're not exactly our closest genetic relatives. Those are chimpanzees and bonobos, but baboons are pretty darn close, like within the high 90 percentile genetic match. It's darn near cannibalism. The more important ramification of this, though, is that we are recognizing, okay, if we take just the scientific ritual observation, which I don't like, but at the same token, I'm going to take it, it shows that people were getting together and performing whatever ritual involves cutting a baboon bone together. People had a culture. So, from these two, and let's be honest, 80,000 years ago, it's very hard to understand even the mindset of people. It would be hard for us to go back to the Elizabethan era or, the Norman era and even understand what is being said. You read Shakespeare and you have to read it 2 or 3 times to understand truly what's being said in a sentence. Well, that's because that's the way they talked. It was normal language for them. So 80,000 years ago, the same basic concepts would be in the human psyche, like water. Yes, we all need water. Food. Yes, we all need food. Hot, cold, all the basics are there, but there's cultural nuances that don't translate through. Just like in our modern days, there's cultural nuances that change wherever you go. So we put it back 80,000 years ago, and I think that we have evidence for some sort of an advanced culture, relatively advanced, as in more than hunter-gatherers and less than a super secret society that was using alien technology and stuff like that. Again, culture is just simply people that shared common ideas and common expression. If this is true, and I admit there's a lot of holes in my argument at present because this is just kind of my fun, play with this idea in my head kind of idea. But at the same token, makes sense. At about 90,000 years ago, there was a bottleneck in humans, and it's speculated we may have gone down to only about 2,000 people in the whole world. And yet 10,000 years later, here we are conducting rituals together. That's a pretty remarkable recovery. And it makes sense. Think about it. There's only 2,000 people left in the world. The ones that are left over are going to bond because there's nobody else out there. If you don't bond, if you don't get along with the group, sadly, you're not surviving. And that's just the way things are. What this culture was, again, I'm going to combine the two artifacts. We know they could plan in advance. That's actually something that's very human, very Homo sapien. We know they planned in advance for an extended period. Like a cat may plan in advance, but it's just thinking, okay, if I do this, then I get this. It's nowhere to the same level as a human is. Now, cats are intelligent animals, very much so. And they just can't match up to a human. Their walnut-sized brains just can't compare to our own. But cats will engage in certain ritualistic practices. For example, open a can if you have a cat or a dog, and they're going to come running just in case it has food in it. They learn that very, very quickly. But humans carving these bones are showing intent. Now we know language of some description was around. There's some argument amongst the evolutionary biologists whether humans really could speak or not, but they're almost all in agreement that there was some form of speaking and there was some kind of sign language. And we also would be out there in the world with Neanderthals and Denisovians and all the other various human subspecies. So it's possible that our culture, however primitive we might find it today, was what kept us together and made us outcompete the Neanderthals, the Denisovians, and all the other subvariants of human that are out there. Culture is very powerful. I don't need to tell you who Iron Man is because since 2008, that character has made such a cultural impact that it's almost impossible not to know who they are. If I mention Samuel L. Jackson, probably needs no introduction. And the same would have been true for a culture, especially one that had survived from 2,000 people. There would have been important, strong individuals, and one of the things we do as humans is pass down our tales. We pass down stories that we have heard. So, people would have been remembered. People would have been, hey, your great-great-grandfather was the one that saved us all when whatever happened. And I think this is where we, as modern people, tend to get a little bit myopic. Everybody is looking for the flood to have happened about 12,000 years ago because that's when the last ice age ended. But if we go back to 80,000 years ago, we're in a different ice age. And we're in a different period where the ice age was melting. It's possible the culture that long ago was remembering an event that happened to them. Since there weren't many people, thousands instead of billions, just the memory of one area being flooded would have been enough for those people to carry it forward in story. And it's a rather attractive myth. It shows the awesome power in the world around us about how a flood nearly wiped us all out. So this proto-culture, as I'm going to call it, is significant, and it's not being paid attention to, partially because it's difficult for any artifacts to have survived this long. I mean, bone breaks down, wood breaks down, marks eventually wear away. It needs to be, conditions need to be perfect for anything to survive. That's why it's so hard about finding fossils. Yes, it would be nice if every single thing that ever died was still down there, but the fact is, worms exist, fungus exist. They all break that stuff down because that's their job in this world. Because of that, our fossil record will never be complete, and quite likely, we're never going to know the full extent of human culture. I would even hazard a guess that this culture, between 80 and 20,000 years ago, was building things. But since they were going to be using trees and, animal fabrics, probably none of it has survived. But our human brains were still capable of it. We were capable of making clothes, which is one thing that gave us an evolutionary advantage over a lot of other species. We were capable of making pretty good spears, javelins, and in that 80 to 20,000 period, somewhere along the line, the bow and arrow was invented. The technology of a throwing stick, which is just a stick that you throw at things, and it's low tech, but evolved into the boomerang. It's quite possible our ancestors used those. It might have even been invented in the same time period. And this knowledge was probably all transmitted from one person to another, given how little the population would have been in that time period, at least in the beginning. So when we look at these artifacts, whether it shows ritual, whether it shows planning, it still shows a culture. And maybe not a universal one, but it had the seeds for what grew into our modern psyche. And that modern psyche is different when you're in China, when you're in Russia, when you're in Britain, when you're in the United States. It does differ, but the basics never do. We all need water. We all need shelter. If you drop me off in those South American tribes that have never been contacted, I guarantee you they will have all of those concepts in their minds. Nothing's going to scare them. Nothing's going to scare them. I'm not going to have to explain any of that. Probably won't have to explain airplanes much to them because they'll have seen them go over once or twice. Humans are smarter than we give them credit for. And you know what? I think if we look into the past, we'll find we were pretty smart back then too. And that's what we don't give ourselves credit for as a species. Everything revolves around the Middle Eastern Middle Eastern agricultural revolution about 12 to 10,000 years ago. while China was making advances at about the same time. The First Nations people of North and South America were discovering things. They were working on developing corn and stuff like that. So everybody's focused on this sexy period between 10,000 years ago and 5,000 years ago. But I'm saying, hey, don't forget this mother culture between 80,000 and 20,000 years. But anyways, just something to think about. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Silverlight Show. If you did, please hit like, share, and subscribe. And we hope you have a fantastic day.